Does your lower back hurt when you exercise? In this video, I'll show you why that may be happening and hopefully how to fix it. Lower back pain can be extremely debilitating. In fact, it's one of the main reasons why people do Pilates. Doctors will often tell their patients, go take some Pilates classes because they know how valuable a strong core is to rehabbing and preventing lower back pain. However, have you ever worked out your abs in a Pilates class, at the gym, or even at home, and it seems like the exercise itself is causing some discomfort and pain in your lower back? Sometimes you feel it during the exercise, and sometimes you feel it the next day. And this discomfort can range from extremely mild to I never want to work my abs out again. Isn't core work supposed to be helping lower back pain instead of causing additional discomfort? What's going on here? Well, the answer lies in the combination of knowledge of human anatomy and our expectations during exercise. So let's dive into the why. Hello, I'm Arnold Lee. I'm a Pilates Master Teacher. I've helped thousands of people heal their bodies by using Pilates, and I'm here to help you today. Here's the specific scenario. You're lying on your back and your instructor tells you to raise your legs into a tabletop position and then asks you to move your arms and legs around in space in any number of standard Pilates exercises. Now, the reason that we do this is because it's an easy, elegant way to work your abs. We've basically put a weight on the end of your pelvis to challenge your core muscles. The weight in this case happens to be your own legs. Now, the thing to know is, in this situation, your abdominal muscles are not the only group of muscles that's working. Your legs are in what's called hip flexion, where the legs are in front of you, versus hip extension, where your leg is behind you. Whenever your hips are in flexion, you're using a group of muscles called the hip flexors. They include muscles like the iliacus, the sartorius, the pectineus. However, the primary hip flexor we're concerned about is called the iliopsoas major, or psoas for short. You may have heard of this muscle. The psoas attach to the leg right here at the lesser trochanter. They go up diagonally through the pelvis and attach to the spine from the inside. Where they attach to your spine is right here in the lower back area. Fun fact, that muscle is the only one that directly connects your leg to your spine. Long story short, if your legs are up in midair, your hip flexors are active and on. They can't not be on. And since they are attached to your lower back internally, whenever you raise your legs like this, you're going to feel something in that area, some type of stress. Now, people get alarmed when they feel any sensation in their lower back during strenuous work or exercise, and I don't blame them. Raise your hand if you've ever tweaked your lower back while lifting something like a heavy piece of luggage. We're programmed to think, unfortunately through personal experience sometimes, that sensation in the lower back automatically equals injury. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not always the case. You see, when most people tweak their backs, they've injured the spinal erectors or extensors. Those muscles, to put it simplistically, are on the back or the outside of the body. However, when you're doing all of those ab exercises with your hip flexors active, they are attaching to your spine from the inside of the body. And get this, at right around the same area as where your spinal extensors are. So it's easy for someone to confuse those sensations and think that they've re-injured their lower back extensors when all they're really feeling is hip flexor activation. Especially when people are beginners at Pilates, they may not have developed the sensitivity to realize that that little stress that they're feeling in their lower back area may just be their hip flexors working normally from the inside. This is also what I mean by expectations. If you are doing an ab exercise you expect to feel something in your abs. In fact, the more sore you are in your abs, the better the workout you figure you've gotten. What you don't expect is to feel things in other places. And if you didn't know about the hip flexors and suddenly you feel some soreness in your lower back where you hurt yourself previously, it can surprise you. Now, let me be very clear. If you have any doubts about the type of pain you are feeling in your lower back, immediately talk to your doctor or physician because you may have something else going on in there, such as a bulging or herniated disc, a subluxation, or a pinched nerve. What I'm trying to clarify in this video is simply the instance where an otherwise healthy person feels a sensation in their lower back and automatically assumes that they've hurt themselves because they just weren't expecting that in a Pilates exercise. The last thing that we want is for somebody to completely stop working their core or quit doing a very valuable ab series just because nobody warned them about these things called the hip flexors. Now that we know the why, let's go into the how of reducing any pain or soreness you might be experiencing as a result of working your abs. Introducing the famous Pilates imprint or imprinted spine. Let's define that term. To put it simply, imprint is when your lower back touches the ground. See, human bodies have natural curves. This here is the lumbar curve. When you lie down, chances are you have a gap between your lower back and the ground. When you bring your legs up and or you do any kind of movement with your legs, this amount of space changes if the pelvis isn't held stable. If the legs drop with force and or change direction too quickly, that impulse on the hip flexor can cause injury. Even if your legs are just held too low, that can strain or injure your hip flexor. Ideally, you would learn and develop the skill of being able to stabilize your pelvis and get stronger, so that lowering your legs low or moving them dynamically become within your capabilities. This is why we exercise. The Pilates solution to this is to use something in your environment to help you stabilize your pelvis. What we've done is secure the top end of the hip flexors to something solid, in this case, the ground. This means that the lower back doesn't flop around and it reduces the chance of injury. Let me give you an example to make this clearer. Have you ever seen somebody at the gym trying to bicep curl a weight that is way too heavy for them? The shoulder sloshes around and the weight moving ballistically can yank and tear the tissues, ligaments, and tendon structures in the shoulder girdle. If you stabilize the shoulder against something solid like a wall, you reduce the chance of injury. The same thing happens to your lower back in an imprint. A few notes about imprint. Your body is probably going to find it difficult to do a proper imprint. It takes physical and mental effort in order to get into and maintain your imprint. Once your abs are tight and your lower back is flat on the ground, if you lose focus, that lower back is going to come off the ground like a jack in the box. This is partially because human beings are goal-oriented. So if your instructor tells you, get those legs as low as you can to get those abs ready for bikini season, what are you going to do? You're going to fixate on the angle that your legs are and trying to get them as low as you can. And when you mentally think about that, you will stop thinking about your imprint and it will lessen or you'll lose it altogether. Also, the anatomy of the human hip is that if your lower back is imprinted, you physically can't lower your legs as much as if your lower back was off the ground. What that's like is you can't curl as much weight with your biceps if your shoulder and back was tight against a wall versus when you're just swinging it around in the middle of the gym. So in our well-intentioned effort to feel the burn, feed our ego, get our legs as low as possible, we may have just taken ourselves right out of that secured imprinted position. Now, there is a correct way and a, shall we say, less correct way to get into an imprint. Let's go over what it's not. Now, If I simply push off of my feet, I can get my lower back to flatten on the ground with my abs completely off. So my lower back will be flat to the ground, but my deep abs will be just pooched out and I'll be rocking some serious dad bod. So while my lower back may be imprinted, what happens when I then raise my legs up off the ground when my instructor tells me to go into a tabletop? That's right, cowboy. Since I'm not pushing off of my legs off the ground anymore, I've just lost the thing that I was using to keep my back tight to the ground. So the moment my legs come up, I lose my imprinted position and my safety. Far better to engage your abs first. Then the lower back will happen to press into the ground. Now, when you raise the legs, you will maintain your imprint. The abs are tight. The lower back is secure to the ground. I call this a win-win. One note, if you have an itty-bitty little waist, you ain't ever going to get your lower back on the ground no matter how much you suck it in. In this case, maybe place a folded foam pad or a towel under the low back to secure the spine. Now you may have heard of something called a neutral spine. What is a neutral spine? Well, it's not an imprinted spine. A gap is allowed between the low back and the ground. You are not driving the low back flat. After all of this talk of the benefits of an imprint, why would you choose to have a gap in your lower back? Well, if you have an injury in your spine, such as a posterior lateral herniation, you have to use a neutral spine. Your doctor and your Pilates instructor will tell you this. Also, some people do find a neutral spine more comfortable. The thing to remember is that a neutral spine is more difficult to pull off than an imprint. This is because your lower back isn't tight up against the ground anymore. You have to do the work of stabilizing your pelvis while it's free floating. During your Pilates career, an instructor will usually start you out in an imprinted position, and then later on they may introduce you to the concept of a neutral spine. They may choose to do this because they want to challenge you and perhaps take you to the next level in your Pilates practice. What they're asking you, in essence, is, can you keep your pelvis stable while I move your legs and limbs around all through space? And let me tell you, in a neutral spine, that's a lot harder than it looks. This is why Pilates teachers have come up with all of these cues through the decades. Things like, pretend you have a blueberry or a grape or a cherry tomato underneath your lower back. Don't make jam by squishing it. Because if you do squish it, then you've demonstrated that you haven't fully mastered pelvic control. Now, please don't assume that because I said neutral spine is harder, that it's the better one to do, and you want to do everything in a neutral spine. Just like learning how to ride a bike, putting training wheels on is a great way for you to learn how to ride without falling and injuring yourself. The imprint and neutral spine both have their places. In fact, some Pilates teachers won't use a neutral spine. They prefer an imprint. One of the reasons why I bring up the neutral spine is because people will either be in a neutral spine when at their strength level they probably should still be using the imprint. Or they think they're in an imprint, but since they've lost their focus, they've slipped into a neutral spine. And the worst part is sometimes they don't know that they've done that. This is why some Pilates instructors will sound like a broken record when they're cueing your abs to help you keep your focus. They'll say things like, keep your belly button pulled in tight, knit your ribs together, keep your abs as flat as a drum, pretend that sheet of muscle is like a saran wrap pulled tight over last night's Thai takeout. Because we know how easy it is to lose focus and your core connection, especially when you're fatigued. And if we're doing our job right, you are slightly tired and working hard and feel like you're being pushed a bit. Now let's talk about the biggest thing you can do after you've completed your ab workout in order to prevent pain. But first, could you do me a small favor? Could you please subscribe to this channel? Click that like button and remember to use your core when you're doing it. My team and myself put a lot of effort into these videos, and if you let YouTube know that you appreciate this content, it really helps us out. Thank you very much. The final piece is what is known as post-exercise restoration of range of motion, otherwise known as stretching. Now, there are a few important details that a lot of people without an anatomy background can miss. Lots of Pilates practitioners don't stretch their hip flexors after they've worked out their abs. This is a mistake. Your hip flexors can shorten up, placing a constant low-grade stress on your lumbar spine, potentially causing issues such as lordosis, excessive anterior tilt, or lower cross syndrome. The solution? Well, you don't not work your hip flexors. You work them out. Know that you're working them out, but then stretch them afterwards. Here's how to do it. If you were to activate the hip flexor, this is what would happen. The hip will flex and the torso will side bend towards and rotate away from that hip. To release the hip flexor, we have to reverse all of these positions. Put the hip into extension, side bend away, and slightly rotate towards that hip flexor, like this. That rotation is what most people miss. You can do this with no equipment on a mat or on a reformer via Eve's lunge. This is why in Eve's lunge, you don't want to duck the head like this. Lots of people misinterpret this as some type of souped-up hamstring stretch. To release the hip flexor, you need that extension. So lift the chest. Just remember that teachers don't usually do the side bend and rotation in the classic version of Eve's lunge. If your teacher doesn't do these hip flexor releases after doing an ab workout, just remember that you can do them yourself later at your own convenience. So to recap, first, understand that when you are doing common Pilates ab exercises, that you are also working a muscle group that you may not have even known existed, and that will cause some sensation in your lower back, which does not necessarily mean that you've injured yourself. Next, you position the spine appropriately, using a tool like the imprint so that you minimize excessive stress on the lower back. Then you gradually increase that stress, perhaps using a tool like the neutral spine as you get stronger, and use well thought out progressions so that you don't actually hurt yourself. Then finally, release those muscles through targeted stretching and knowledge of human anatomy. I hope you found this video helpful. Please ask me any questions in the comments below. Also, keep an eye out for my next episode coming up soon. Until then, thank you very much.